Hi, I'm Stuart. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching my video. In this video, I'm going to do the third in the series that I'm doing about my musical experiences. I decided to split my experiences in the 80s into two videos. The first was about my pop-leaning experiences, and I already recorded and published that one. And this is about my heavy music experiences. In this video I talk about what led to me becoming a heavy metal fan. I got the idea of doing this series from a conversation I had with Kelly at Books I'm Not Reading in the comment section to one of her videos. We realized we both like Tori Amos, so that kind of triggered me to do this video series. This is just a sidelight to the book series. I'm still going to mainly concentrate it on the book videos. But I think I am going to try a little more when I talk toward the end about other things that are going on with me. Talk a little more about the music I'm listening to, music I may have purchased. An event occurred in 1983, which was what started me to really becoming a heavy metal fan. But there was music I listened to, heavy music I listened to before that. It didn't cause me to become a fan, but it wasn't that in 1983 was the first time I listened to heavy music. In the early 70s, I got the album Machine Head by Deep Purple. In the 70s, I listened to Black Sabbath songs, Paranoid and Iron Man on the radio. I know I got their Heaven and Hell album in 1980. That was an album where Ronnie James Dio replaced Ozzy Osbourne. I think I probably got some of their earlier albums. I did later, I know, get them, but I think I probably did maybe get something of theirs besides the Heaven and Hell album too. I listened to Ozzy Osbourne's solo music starting in 1980, and I got one or more of his early albums. I got AC/DC's albums, Highway to Hell, Back in Black, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, and To Those Who Brought to Rock We Salute You in the late 70s into the early 80s. I got Van Halen's albums, Van Halen, Van Halen 2, Women and Children First, Women and Children First, Fair Warning, and Diver Down from 78 into the early 80s. In early 1983, I got the Pyromania album by Def Leppard. But it was a specific thing in 1983, which really was my real start to becoming a heavy metal fan. Mid-1983, Iron Maiden released the Peace of Mind album. I think my impetus to getting it was probably hearing Flight of Icarus on the radio, and maybe Run to the Hills, even though Run to the Hills was on their previous album to that, The Number of the Beast. But at the time, I listened to stations that would play heavy metal. Peace of Mind was one of those rare albums that hit me really hard from the first time I listened to it. It was just, they played fast, they were heavy, they had literal lyrics. There was a song on there, Where Eagles Dare, which was based on an Alistair MacLean novel of the same name. A novel which actually I still haven't read yet, but thinking Iron Maiden makes me want to read it. Another song on there is To Tame a Land. I believe that song was about the Dune series by Frank Herbert. I went on to get their first three albums, Iron Maiden, Killers, and Number of the Beast. All three were really good, but with The Number of the Beast, Bruce Dickinson became their vocalist, and that was really when, to me, like, Dickinson as their vocalist is really, really the best one, and that was really when I really thought from that period on they were really good. Well, actually there's another vocalist later on, but when Dickinson joined them, The Number of the Beast and Peace of Mind, those are just fantastic albums. I continued getting their albums. They had a bunch of good albums. I did see them live. I'll talk about that when I talk about the heavy music concerts I went to in the 80s. Iron Maiden is just, they were then and they still are just a mighty band. They're just a mighty band. Just a standard bearer for heavy metal. Now I want to talk about my other top tier heavy metal, heavy music bands. First I want to talk about is the Scorpions. I think the first I heard about the Scorpions was when I heard Rock You Like a Hurricane on the radio. I got the album was on Love at First Sting, that had other great songs on it, hit songs. Rock You Like a Hurricane was a huge hit, and they had other big hits from that album, Still Loving You and Big City Nights. I got some of their other albums too. They wrote great metal songs, great musicianship, kind of razor sharp musicianship but the songs were still catchy. The Scorpions were just a huge band. Another band I started listening to back then was Motley Crue. I don't remember what led me to listening to Motley Crue, but in the latter part of 1983, I got their Shout at the Devil album. Shortly thereafter, I got their first album, Too Fast for Love. They had really good songs. They weren't great musicians, but there's a lot of attitude to them. More attitude than skill. They had a wild image. I just liked the combination of them. I just loved them back then in the 80s. I got more of their albums. Next band is Dio. In 1984, I saw the Last in Line video. Don't think it was MTV. I don't know why I recall it, but I think it was like a late night video show. It's kind of a deceptive song. It has an acoustic intro, but then it starts to really rock. And I love the song and the video. And that led me to getting the album with the same name. Then I got their earlier album, Holy Diver. There were just a lot of great songs on those albums. Dio's a great metal vocalist. The lyrics were like a lot of mythology. I think he was influenced in his lyric writing by growing up Catholic. Ronnie James Dio, he's one of the all-time great metal vocalists. Next is Aerosmith. In 1987, they released the album Permanent Vacation. It was a huge comeback album for them. In the early 80s, they nearly broke up, I think mainly over drug issues. In 1985, they released the album Done with Mirrors. It was a mediocre album, but it was good that they got back together for it. Permanent Vacation had hits in Ragdoll and Dude Looks Like a Lady. And then in 1989, they released the album Pump, and that continued their comeback. That had some great singles on it. Fine, Love in an Elevator, Jamie's Got a Gun. After these two albums, they were back big time. In 1988, Guns N' Roses released the Appetite for Destruction album. I think the first I heard of them, which I think is the first most of us heard of them, was Welcome to the Jungle, hearing that on the radio. That was just a great album. There were other hit songs from it. Sweet Child of Mine, Paradise City. And there was a kind of an aura about them, an aura of danger, which as time went on, that was both a good and a bad thing, but a lot of people consider them kind of a breath of fresh air after the hair metal bands and the glam metal bands of the 80s, even though they came out of the same scene in Los Angeles as those bands did. It was just a great album. Next band I want to talk about is Megadeth. In 1988, I got their album So Far, So Good, So What. I don't remember the impetus for me getting the album. Unlike bands like Aerosmith and Guns N' Roses and Iron Maiden, Megadeth wasn't played on the radio. It might have been subscribing to Circus Magazine, which I'm not sure when I started, but there was a period of time where I did subscribe to them. But Megadeth was one of the first thrash metal bands. They just played really fast. I love their riffs on the album. I liken it to galloping guitars. That's kind of what I refer to. Variety of lyrics that leader Dave Mustaine wrote. They played, as a thrash metal band, they played really fast. There was a great cover of the Sex Pistols' Anarchy in the UK on the album. And I went back and got their first two albums, Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good, and Peace Sells, Who's Buying. I liked Peace Sells even better than I like So Far, So Good, So What. A lot of great songs in the album. The title song, Wake Up Dead. Just some great albums, great songs. They're a great band. I continue to get their albums. The next band is Slayer. In 1988, I got their album South of Heaven. I recall reading a Rolling Stone article about the recording of the album. They're recording it when there's a lightning storm outside, and it really kind of made them seem kind of scary and painted really a picture of them as maybe a dangerous band. I'm not sure that's the reason I got the album, though. The album was somewhat divisive amongst fans because they're another one of the original thrash bands, but they slowed it down some on the album, and a lot of fans didn't like that. I really loved, though, South of Heaven and Mandatory Suicide off that album, and other songs too, but those songs particularly stand out for me. I went back and got their earlier albums, including Rain and Blood. I think Slayer had really brutal lyrics. They had really brutal lyrics, and I kind of think, in retrospect, that with their sound, and especially their lyrics, they took things as far as a band could and still become an arena band. In late summer 1988, the second major event in my heavy metal fandom occurred, and if people are from that era or familiar with the era, you can probably guess what I'm going to say next, but Metallica released the And Justice for All album, and that was an album that just hit me so hard right from the beginning. If I didn't get it the first day it came out, I got it soon thereafter. It's just heavy, great lyrics, only 9 songs, they're long, but it's just unrelenting. I had previously gotten their Master of Puppets album, and for some reason that album wasn't one I listened to a lot, which is kind of weird because now it's one of my favorite albums, but it didn't make me a Metallica fan, and Justice for All did. I soon went back and got their 2 earliest albums, Kill 'Em All and Ride the Lightning, and also great albums. Just a great band. To my mind and many, the greatest heavy metal band of all time. That wouldn't be thought maybe at that time. There's some later stuff that occurred, especially in the early 90s, that I'll talk about that really could catapult them to that. But the And Justice for All album is just one of my all-time favorites, and nothing's ever going to change that. Just a really powerful album. One band that is a second-tier band of mine from that period of time is Judas Priest. I think the first I heard of Judas Priest was when they did a cover of Joan Baez's Diamond and Rust. It sounds like a strange combo, but they really did a good job on it. The only Judas Priest album I remember getting is Turbo, but I know I got other albums from them. I'm not really sure why they didn't rise to the level of, say, the other European bands like Iron Maiden and the Scorpions for me, but I still like them. They're still a good band, real good band. The next band is Rat. The first I heard of Rat was hearing their single Round and Round on the radio. That led me to get their Out of the Cellar album. They were another band that came out of the Los Angeles club music scene in the 80s, like some of the other bands I'm talking about in this video. They never really did reach the heights, I think, of Motley Crue or Poison. I'll talk about Poison a little later. But I think they were actually better musically than them, and actually the songs that they, at least the recorded versions of this, showed more skill than Poison or Motley Crue did. They didn't have the charisma of bands like Poison or Motley Crue, but as I said, I think they were more skilled musically. I got some more of their albums, and I did like them, but they're not a band I think about much anymore, like I do some of these other bands. Next band is Poison. In 1986, they released their Look What the Cat Dragged In album. It had some really catchy songs on it. Talk Dirty to Me in the title track, which I really liked. Poison was another one of those bands that, like some of these others, like I mentioned, came out of the California, Los Angeles club scene. They were called, they and others of their ilk were called somewhat derisively hair metal bands because they were attractive guys, they had long hair, they wore a lot of makeup. I think they were sort of like Motley Crue in the sense that they weren't that great musically, but they had a certain attitude. They did have a lot of good songs. They were considered a glam metal band, a hair metal band, and the term hair metal was used derisively. For a band, they had long hair, they were attractive guys who wore a lot of makeup. I did get some more of their albums, I did like them, but they didn't rise quite to the level for me of being a top tier band. Next band is Anthrax. In 1987, they released the Among the Living album. Like a lot of these bands, because it's been so long since then, I don't really remember what led me to it. That album is a great album. They're another one of the original thrash bands. It has some great songs, Caught in a Mosh and I'm the Law. I think I Am the Law has one of the greatest metal intros of any song I've ever heard. I did get some more of their albums. I'm not sure why, for me, they never rose to the level of like a Megadeth or Slayer. It does seem strange to me that I actually started listening to them before I did Megadeth and Slayer, but looking at when the relative albums came out that I got, it's kind of inescapable that I did. I don't mean to say I didn't like them, I did. They just didn't rise to the level of those other bands. But as I said, I did get some more of their albums. Next, I'm going to talk about some of the heavy music concerts I attended in the 80s. Actually, it's as many as I think I can remember I attended. But it's possible there were some others. In late 1984, I learned that Iron Maiden was coming to the Hartford Civic Center in Hartford, Connecticut. So I soon drove to the Hartford Civic Center, got tickets for me and my friend. We went to the Hartford Civic Center that night. The Hartford Civic Center is, at that time, had an arena, but it had a group of stores near in the building, so they would refer to it as the mall, the Hartford Civic Center. Well, me and my friend went in there, and all the stores were closed. This was the first heavy metal concert we've been to. And we saw all the stores being closed, and we thought, what are we getting into? It was kind of like we were at an event, and they were preparing for the invasion of the barbarian hordes. So we got a little nervous about that. But the restaurants were open, so we were able to get something to eat. So we went in the arena. We had floor seats, sort of toward the back. You kind of learn quickly as a fan that floor seats have a great reputation, but they're really not that great unless you're pretty up close. In those days, too, people used to stand in their seats on the floor. They wouldn't let that happen now, but so you had to stand too. Well, we got our floor seats. Twisted Sister was the opening band. It was their rather short period of real fame. They had some catchy hits, We're Not Gonna Take It, and I forget the other one, but I think both of them starred the actor who played Niedermeyer in the Animal House series, playing the same character. But that was their brief moment of fame. They came out and played. They were really good. I remember my friend playing that, saying that Iron Maiden was going to have a tough time topping that. And then they came out and they were awesome. They had a great stage set. It had to be the Power Slave tour, even though in my memory, the Power Slaves tour, which I did see, was later than that. But it had to be the Power Slave tour. They just had great stage sets. In that case, it would have been an Egyptian motif. They had a animatronic puppet, a huge animatronic puppet called Eddie, which critics disparaged, but was really cool as a fan. Most importantly, they just played really great. They had the songs. They played really well, really heavy. Bruce Dickinson is just a great metal vocalist. it was just a great experience seeing them live. First metal concert. They're just awesome. And that kind of started my friend initially with me, but then he dropped off with them, me, and seen a lot of metal concerts over the years. And that concert, I think I said early 85, was actually January 14, 1985. Some of these I actually know the precise dates. Most of them I don't. The second concert I saw in May 1985 was also Iron Maiden. It was also on the Power Slave tour. I don't really remember anything different from the first one, just they're great. Except was the opening act. They're a band that they're another European heavy metal band. They had a really catchy song, great song called Balls to the Wall. And I do recall getting the album that was on. As I said, no particular memories of that one. It's just another verification of what a great band Iron Maiden is live. In August of 1985, I saw Motley Crue and Y&T at the New Haven Coliseum. Y&T was another one of those bands that kind of seemed like they might break big, but they never did. They're a pretty good band. I had some of their music. Remember, we were just a little off the floor. It was kind of a crazy show. Remember people just jumping the barriers, going on the floor. Motley Crue is a kind of wild band, and just good seeing them. In 1985, I saw Dio with a couple of friends at the New Haven Coliseum. Don't remember who opened. Unfortunately, with a lot of these concerts, I can't remember details really. It's just great seeing a band like Dio. I think there was some kind of stage set with him though too. Maybe not like a puppet like the Eddie one with Iron Maiden. I think there was some kind of cool stage set to be at. A lot of the metal bands had a cool stage setup. In 1985, I saw Aerosmith and Ted Nugent at the New Haven Coliseum. I had a few Ted Nugent albums at the time. Wouldn't say he became a real favorite of mine, but good seeing him. He was a special, I think they called it a special act or something like that, which means he could play more than a typical opening act. It was kind of interesting even in 1985. He was no longer a headliner. Another thing I didn't know, looking at his album, listening to him, I didn't realize Nugent didn't really sing very much. He played guitar and he had another person singing for us. But the real reason I was there to see Iron Maiden, and although, as I said earlier, the Done with Mirrors album was kind of mediocre, it was good they got together and they played a lot of those classic songs from the 70s that I loved, from the Rocks album, Toys in the Attic album, their first album, all those songs like Dream On and Big 10-inch Record and all the great songs from their early era. In April 8, 1988, I saw David Lee Roth with Poison opening at the Hartford Civic Center. Didn't really talk about Roth. He had left Van Halen, and so he had released some solo music, which was pretty good. I think most of us there would want to see him play Van Halen songs. I know he did. I can't remember what particular ones. Can't remember what Poison did either, but it was good to see him. On May 5, 1988, I saw AC/DC at the Harvard Civic Center. Just another band it's good to see. One thing I do remember about them is for their final encore song, they did For Those About to Rock Will Salute You. And they had kind of these cannons on stage which would shoot off fireworks, which was pretty cool. I always did think though that song should have been the first song because they're playing a song saluting people about to rock, and they're playing as their last song. On July 27, 1988, I saw Whitesnake at the Hartford Civic Center. Didn't mention Whitesnake amongst my top-tier bands, but they would certainly be a first or second-tier band from the 80s. They released a big album that was self-titled Whitesnake in the mid-80s, and there was a big hit single from it, Here We Go Again. Probably more hit singles too, I think, from it. It was just a big album. I saw them a couple times, and I did really like them a lot. So they would definitely be included in my top 2 tiers of bands from that era. Not a band I think about too much anymore, but if I had heard, if I did hear the album or the songs from it, I would like them still to this day. In 1985, I saw Rat with Bon Jovi opening at the Hartford Civic Center. I do recall that the concert wasn't totally sold out, wasn't totally full. Perhaps the most interesting thing about the concert was that in 1985, Bon Jovi was an opening act. They had a minor hit, Little Runaway, but they weren't yet where they became a huge stadium band. And the other interesting part is that at that time they could play a concert with a metal band, and that wouldn't be something that would have happened now. But it was cool seeing Rat too. In 1986, I saw Judas Priest at the New Haven Coliseum. That was part of the Turbo Tour. It was late spring, early summer. Most interesting thing about that, looking back at it, there was a lot of the fans were cutting the seat covers off and flinging them. I didn't get hit by any. But what makes that really interesting is that if you think of the security we have now post 9/11, which people in this country knows the reference, but if you're outside of the country, that's a reference to September 11, 2001, when some terrorists flew planes into the World Trade Center, and there was a bunch of people killed by it. So after that, and I know people know that it occurred. I'm just not sure that the term 9/11 might be familiar to people outside the country. So after that, there was a big increase in security at concerts, sporting events too, but you usually would have to go through a metal detector or get wanded or get patted down or some combination of them to get into a arena or clubs even. So contrast that to the fact that in 1986, a lot of people, mostly men because metal then was mostly men, there was enough of them that had knives that they could cut off the seats, they could fling these seat covers all around. And that's kind of scary if I think about looking back at it. The promoter, though, wasn't so concerned with that part of it, but that the promoter wasn't insured for the loss of those seats being damaged like that. So they didn't have any more metal concerts for the remainder of the summer. But then I think it was early fall, Judas Priest played the Springfield Civic Center, and Springfield Civic, that's just north of Connecticut, Springfield, and there was nothing, no damage, nothing to speak of at all. So then they reinstated metal concerts. But it's just interesting contrasting what that was like then and now. There was a certain danger then, and I don't think that was necessarily good. I don't remember anything specific about Judas Priest, just good to see him. In 1987, I saw Iron Maiden again at the New Haven Coliseum. I don't remember what that tour was in particular, but I know they would have had another cool stage set. On April 16th, 1988, I saw Megadeth with Warlock opening at the West Hartford Ballroom / Agora. The place went through multiple names, and I don't recall what they were called for specific concerts. Warlock was a band I liked too. They were headed by Doro Pesch, a metal band with a front woman, which was unusual at that time. Maybe still sort of unusual now, but I really like them. Megadeth is a band that, as much as I like them, the concerts I've seen with them have been hit or miss. Sometimes I really like them a lot, sometimes I'm just kind of blah about them. I think this was kind of one of the blah concerts, and I'm not sure really why, but that's just the way it's been with them for me. On October 14, 1988, I saw Van Halen at the Hartford Civic Center. This was a version of Van Halen which Sammy Hagar was the frontman for. He had replaced Roth when Roth left. I think Roth left. I don't recall if it was acrimonious parting, but Sammy Hagar. The music, it got less heavy with Hagar singing lead, but I still like their albums. Probably not as much as the albums with Roth leading them, but I did like the album Sammy Hagar led. It was good to see the remainder of the band too, Eddie Van Halen. Eddie Van Halen is one of the few guys. One of the things that occurred back then, which doesn't occur so much now, is there were a lot of solos. Most solos I didn't like. I just didn't really think. They just were kind of a waste of time. But seeing Eddie Van Halen solo, considering his stature, that was one person I could appreciate seeing solo. So good to see them, even if it's not my ideal incarnation of the band. In November 4, 1988, I saw a co-bill of Slayer and Motorhead at the Agora Ballroom in West Hartford. As I said before, I'm not sure it was named that then, but it doesn't really matter, I guess. Motorhead was a band that I did have some music to, a legendary band. Good to see them. Just remember that was kind of a crazy concert. Before the concert, people were throwing beer bottles at the side of the venue and they were smashing, and there was a lot of moshing inside. So I kind of, even then, in my youth, I kind of didn't get in the pit. I kind of stood back, but there was still even moshing if you were even back. But another band is good to see for the first time. And Slayer certainly has an aura when they perform live. They have cool lighting and stuff like that. In 1989, I saw Metallica as part of their Injustice for All tour at the Harvard Civic Center. Just great seeing a band like that for the first time, especially off the album that's still my favorite. As with most of these, I can't remember any details, but just cool to know that I saw them back then. In the late 80s, I saw Aerosmith another time at Lake Compounce in Bristol, Connecticut. Could have been 1990, because I know I saw him in 1980, but I think 1990, but I think I did see him in the late 80s also there. Probably off their Permanent Vacation tour. And I did in the late 80s saw Poison headline, probably at the Harvard Civic Center. And in the late 80s, I saw Motley Crue headline at the Harvard Civic Center. I actually saw Motley Crue 4 times in the 80s and never since. Between the New Haven Coliseum and the Harvard Civic Center, I don't remember the breakdown between them. Although mostly they were probably the final 3 times at the Harvard Civic Center. Next, I'm just going to go through a lot of these bands and just say where they are now, if they're doing anything at all, what I know about that. Deep Purple is actually touring now. As a matter of fact, right around this time, I think they're doing a concert in my state. I know they are. I'm just not sure if it occurred already. They're touring with Yes, actually. Black Sabbath did their farewell tour, and I think it was 2016. I did in fact see one of the dates. I don't believe they're going to ever tour again. Ozzy Osbourne did release some music pretty recently, but I don't know if he'll ever tour again. He has Parkinson's disease, so I don't know if touring will be possible for him. I did see recently that I think AC/DC is going to tour again. I don't know if they're going to release some music, but they probably would before they would tour. Def Leppard is still a touring band. They did release some new music not long ago. Iron Maiden is still a touring band too. They still release music. Unfortunately, most bands with me, and singers, is I tend to get their new music out of habit, but then I gravitate toward the music in their prime. But Iron Maiden's still together, still touring. Interesting fact that their lead singer, Bruce Dickinson, is a licensed pilot and not for like the small planes. I think he is licensed for 737s. And he is one of the pilots that flies their plane. They have their own plane. I think the Scorpions still tour too, despite their, I think, being 50 plus years as a band. Motley Crue had a farewell tour, but then they toured again recently. I know they had a show in my state in late August, so they are touring again. Maybe they released new music. If so, I haven't seen it. Unfortunately, Ronnie James Dio died maybe half a dozen years or so ago. I believe it was cancer. He was his late 60s, so he's no longer with us. And as far as Aerosmith, I mentioned this in my first video, but They were doing a farewell tour. Their lead singer, Steven Tyler, had throat issues, so they postponed the tour for a while, but it was recently determined by his medical people that they weren't going to be able to take care of the problem, so Aerosmith is effectively retired. Guns N' Roses is one of those what might have been bands. They really only ended up releasing, I think, maybe a half a dozen albums. Axl Rose was pretty difficult to work with, and I think he drove most of the band members off, and they do things like they'd blow off concerts. He was watching a basketball game on TV and they blew off a concert for that, things like that. But he did seem to get it together because they mounted some tours in the late 2010s. I actually saw them in 2017, and they were really together then. They played like 3.5 hours, 7 encore songs. Took them a little while to get in gear, his voice and the band, but when they did, they were really good. And they've toured again after that too. Don't know anything about releasing any albums. It's possible they've released individual songs, but I'm not aware of them. Megadeth still releases music, still tours. It's really Dave Mustaine and whoever he wants to play with. He can be difficult to get along with too. But still puts out good albums. They are a very consistent band. As much as Metallica is my favorite heavy metal band, Megadeth, I think, is more consistent, even if they never rose close to the levels that Metallica did. Slayer had done a farewell tour, but I think I've read something recently. They're considering getting together again and maybe releasing music or touring again. I saw something about that. It's funny because as music fans, we don't really care if we go see a farewell tour. We're perfectly happy if the band reunites again. Hope they do. I'm not sure I'd see him again. I'm not going to many concerts these days, but I hope they do for the sake of the fans. Metallica still releases music, still tours, a stadium band. They're doing a tour now where they play stadiums and they do 2 different nights separated by a day off, and they play different songs each night, which is really impressive. So they're still touring, still doing well. I think Judas Priest might have retired as a band. Not totally positive, but I think they did. You can never tell for sure, but I believe at this time they're retired. Rat is a band that still exists in a certain incarnation. There's Stephen Percy, their lead singer, is no longer with them. He tours solo and they tour solo. They didn't maintain the heights of bands like, say, Poison and Motley Crue, which could still play in arenas. So Rat and Percy play in clubs, maybe small, medium-sized theaters, but not arenas. Poison toured not long ago, and Bret Michaels, their lead singer, toured not long ago. I'm really not sure what's going on with them as a band, whether they're ever going to tour again or what, or release music. Anthrax is still a band too. They still tour. I believe they still release music. I know not too long ago I saw they released an album. They never quite got to the level of, say, a Megadeth or Slayer either. I think Anthrax was more a club, maybe big club, but small, medium-sized theater, but I don't think they ever became a headlining arena band. I don't really know what's going on with Twisted Sister, if they'll get together and tour again or what, or if their lead singer Dee Snider tour. But I have no idea what's going on with them. Nor do I have any idea of what's going on with Accept. Could well be they're still slogging it out. And same with Y&T. I think it's more likely Accept is still slogging it out. I have heard nothing about Y&T. Ted Nugent is actually more known now for being on the board of the NRA and being a proponent for gun rights. He still does tour, but he'll play clubs and I think small theaters too, like some of these other ones I mentioned. Bon Jovi, as I alluded to earlier, became a super group. They play stadiums. They're still a big group, still releasing music. They wouldn't now probably fit in playing with a metal band, but back then they did. I don't really have any idea what's going on with Whitesnake. I did see them not too long ago as an opening act. I don't recall offhand who it was with, but I don't know what's going on with them, if anything. Of course, some of these people are pretty up there in age, too. As far as Van Halen, Eddie Van Halen passed away, so I don't think we'll see any version of Van Halen without him. I don't think the remaining band members would do it, which includes his brother and his son, so I'm sure we won't see Van Halen again. Could see Roth again, although I don't know what he's doing either. Another band I saw a couple times in the 1980s was Blue Oyster Cult. As I mentioned in my first video I did, when I talked about the 70s, they're one of my top tier bands. I saw them in the West Hartford Ballroom, Stage West. As I said, the place went by multiple names, but big club. And one concert they went by their own name, Blue Oyster Cult. Another they went by Soft White Underbelly, and I don't really know why they used that name. But it was another band that's good to see, another favorite of mine. They're a band that, despite the fact that they only were briefly an arena band, still slogs it out, at least last I heard, on the club circuit, which they've been doing for decades. I don't think there's too many members from the original band left, and the last album of theirs I got, although it was good, it didn't sound like Blue Oyster Cult, maybe because maybe the original vocalist was gone. Next, I just want to show a couple of programs I got. I didn't get too many programs at concerts. I tended to get t-shirts and hats and stuff like that. But here's one from Blue Oyster Cult. I'll try just to show just a little bit inside. If you can see, maybe you can't, but a little bit, you know. And here's the back of it. And this is one from Iron Maiden, the World Slavery Tour, which would have been the first two times I saw them. Cover, a little bit inside. Hopefully you can see this decently. And the back. Be interested to know if you have any memories of music from the 80s, or even if you're younger than that, if there's some bands from that era you like. Be interested to hear about it. Please add a comment if you'd like. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Please subscribe. Please hit the bell so you get notified when I upload future videos. I hope you're having a wonderful week.